Welcome to Community United Church of Christ, Fresno, where no matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you are welcome here. I am glad to see all who are here today in person, and I welcome those watching on live stream and on YouTube. Each week that we gather, we remember that the land upon which this church was built was originally Yokut's land. Let's take a moment to close our eyes and visualize this land 200 years ago. From the corner of Fresno and Browning, the valley floor would stretch from mountains to coastal to the Sierra Nevadas. Pretty flat except for some rolling hills. This is before agriculture and the Fresno scraper flattened everything. Natural springs would pop up. 5 miles north, about a 2-hour walk, was the big river. What would we have heard? The sound of wind and trees, birds. Yokut's land. Yokut's land. You can open your eyes. Our pastor, Julia Penner-Zook, is away today, as well as our band leader, E.J. Hinojosa. The sermon will be delivered by Derek Cheatham, and David Kasuga will lead the band. Take it away, David.
Thank you. Please rise and body your spirit.
gathered here with you, with my friends and my neighbors and family too. When we're gathered, our differences are the glue. We are gathered. Deep as the ocean, sacred as night, pure as fire, burning as bright as the sunlight. How great is your love, O God. Deep as the ocean, sacred as night, pure as fire, burning as bright as the sunlight. How great is your love, O God. How deep is your love, how true is your word. How whole and complete the life that you give. How firm a foundation, sturdy beneath our feet. How mighty is your love. Deep as the ocean, sacred as night, pure as fire, burning as bright as the sunlight. How great is your love, O God. Deep as the ocean, sacred as night, pure as fire, burning as bright as the sunlight. How great is your love, O God. How lovely the words you speak into place. How brilliant the light you set in our eyes. How endless your grace and wondrous your boundless worth. How mighty is your love. Deep as the ocean, sacred as night, pure as fire, burning as bright as the sunlight. How great is your love, O God. Deep as the ocean, sacred as night, pure as fire, burning as bright as the sunlight. How great is your love, O God. Deep as the ocean, sacred as night, pure as fire, burning as bright as the sunlight. How great is your love, O God.
Seated.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Rossi,
And my name is Aravis.
and today I'll be talking about personal gifts.
We all have some gifts that make each and every one of us unique. God created each and every one of us in our own special way. For me, I have a hard time coming up with my own special gifts, but what I know that one that I have for sure is that I'm able to come up here and talk every week in front of you guys, and public speaking can be a tough thing to do. And even after all the times I do it, I still get nervous each and every time I come up here and speak. But I know that it's one of my gifts that make me unique. And who knows, maybe public speaking could be one of your special gifts too, but you won't know until you try it.
And there are so many different gifts out there that it is important to make sure that you're sharing your gifts with others. But sometimes finding your gift can be hard because sometimes you may not know what you want to do or maybe what you're good at. But that is okay because everyone is different, which is why I find it so important to express the things that you're good at. And for example, your gifts, because that can make a really good change in the world. It can really impact the people around you and yourself for the better.
Remember to always express your gifts. And we hope you have a great day.
We have different ways of offering prayers at church. You can light a candle out in the narthex for a prayer between you and God. You can put written prayers in the small canister for the confidential prayer team to pray over for the following 30 days. We also have a small binder for written prayers to be prayed out loud during worship. Dear God, we gather here today, weighted with worry about Ukraine, our climate, loved ones who are suffering. We feel powerless against Putin's acts of aggression, inflation, political division, violence and guns in our neighborhoods. Some nights as I fret, I have trouble sleeping, oh God. Some days I can only take in so much news. God, I confess that I forget to loop you in. In these troubling times, O God, remind us of your promise and assurance. Help us see the small waves of goodness. Help us recognize the moments of grace. Energize us. We need your peace and love to sustain us and propel us in the world. Amen. Now, please join with me in the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
Good morning. Many of you have heard my backstory. Most of you have heard me go on and on about the closest of my family. So I'm going to go directly to the reason I found this church and the reason I believe we should give of time, talent, and money. On April 17th, 2010, my sister died unexpectedly. My world crumbled at my feet. My family and I were in a world of mourning and grief. And I remember the day that she died, I was at the house with my brother-in-law niece, Nikki, and my brother-in-law said to me, "You know, Donna, your sister was crazy in love with you." And I said, "As I am with her." And he said, "If she'd had her way, we would have lived in the same house." And I said, "I know, but we lived in the same neighborhood. We did the next best thing." 4 months later, unbelievably, my mother passed away. Again, we went into grief and mourning, and it lasted for me, it was about 7 years. But my niece and daughter, Nikki and Devin, about a year and a half after my mom passed away, decided maybe church was our answer, and maybe it would help us. So I said, good luck. I had no interest. So they started visiting churches, and each Sunday they'd come by the house and tell me it was okay. I would say, go try College Community, the name of this church at the time. They'd go to another church, come by, it was okay. Again, go try College Community. Third Sunday it happened. Again, I said, go try College Community. I still had no interest, even though I knew of this church. I had come here as a child or a youngster. My Uncle Carton and Aunt Louise were charter members, and my Uncle Carton was on the committee in search of our Reverend Hayden. So one Sunday they decided to come here. Oh my gosh, they got back to the house. They were so excited. Oh my gosh, Mom, you have got to come to this church. You do not understand how wonderful it is. I said, yeah. So Sunday again they came, and again the same thing. Mom, please, Aunt Donna, please come. Yeah. About the third Sunday, I said, okay, I'm only going to get rid of this if I tell them okay. I'll go one time. And I said, okay, fine. I'll go with you guys the next Sunday. So I remember coming, and I sat right where Marge is right now. I was going to be obscured and not seen. But that doesn't happen. At the front door, you are seen. You are greeted warmly and welcome. And I said, uh-oh. But I still sneaked in and sat there. Well, forget that noise, because the end of the sermon, Pastor Chris, the pastor of it at the time, saw me, apparently, as I realize all pastors see who's in their congregation. He came down off the stage, right down the aisle, and greeted me, shook my hand, and wanted to know about me. Okay. Well, that's okay. I can still not come. Forget it. It didn't happen. I said, okay, I'm going to come, but I'm not going to get involved. Nobody's going to be my friend. I will just be acquaintances, and I'm not going to get involved. I was involved in so many other things out in the community, between PTA and School Site Council and Hoover Ed Foundation and coaching soccer and basketball and softball and all that. I was not going to get involved in a new thing. Again, crazy me. That did not happen. So what I found here is that I wanted to give my time, and because I was no longer a parent in Fresno Unified, I was a grandparent, I started letting go of some of those obligations and started joining more in these obligations. And Amy, I see you shaking your head because you know about time and how we have to choose what we, how much. And Brian back there would tell me, Donna, you can say no. And he was so supportive. And you guys are all so wonderful. But what I also found is I have friends here. I have really good friends here. And I saw faces of people I knew outside of church, such as the Vivians, and Carol Evans, I also knew outside of the church. There were many, many of you. Barbara McDowell's mother, I can't remember her first name right now, but Barbie went to school with us. Anyway, you guys became my friends. And so I thought, this is a pretty darn good place to start giving my time and money. There is a quote, and I can't remember her name, so many of you will be able to tell me, but she said, give till it feels good, or don't give till it hurts, give till it feels good. I love that. And I love the fact that we could ask questions here, and I love the fact that no matter who we were, who we are welcome. We don't have to be perfect, none of us are, and we could share and be supported. I do the deposits once a month, and I get the biggest smiles back there when I open an envelope that has $1 or $5 in it. I think that's fantastic, because I know that's the best. They probably dug down in their pockets, and that was the last $5 they had. I get as excited as when I see $100 or $500 in there. So I just want to thank all of you. I would like to ask you to make sure you fill out our time and talent sheet that's going around, because time and talent is just as important as our money. And whatever you can give, we are so grateful. Thank you very much, and have a fabulous day.
This is the time in the service where we ask you to give in support of the church today. You can give electronically, as you can be reminded of on the screen. You can also leave a cash or check in the two plates. We've got a plate in the sanctuary, and then there's a plate outside on the narthex table. Please give generously.
God is still speaking from Matthew 28:16 through 20, and that's the Message paraphrase translation. Meanwhile, the 11 disciples were on their way to Galilee, headed for the mountain Jesus had set for their reunion. The moment they saw him, they worshiped him. Some, though, held back, not sure about worship, about risking themselves totally. Jesus, undeterred, went right ahead and gave his charge. God authorized and commanded me to commission you. Go out and train everyone you meet, far and near, in this way of life, marking them by baptism in the threefold name, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Then instruct them in the practice of all I have commanded you. I'll be with you as you do this, day after day after day, right up until the end of the age.
Our speaker today is Derek Cheatham. Derek and family began visiting our church last summer. He and his wife, Kat, are working with Felicia and David Rocha as youth leaders, and Derek has been playing guitar in the band every few weeks. He was a pastor in Arizona and now works as a hospice chaplain. Welcome, Derek Cheatham.
Good morning. It's been a minute since I've been up here in this position, so I'm a little nervous. Thank you for welcoming us, my family, Kat and our daughter Anna. Our other two kids, Bethany and Peter, are still in Arizona. They are entering the world of adulthood, and they say they like it, so just trying to let them go with that as long as that can last. But wanted to talk today about the passage that we just heard. I want to start out by telling you of one of the most amazing people that I've ever read about. Her name is Fannie Lou Hamer. I don't know if you've ever heard anything about Fannie Lou or not, but if you haven't, go Google her. Again, Fannie Lou Hamer. She was very involved in the civil rights movement in the 60s, late 50s, early 60s, but was truly, in my opinion, a hero, unlike too many others in that movement. And she had so many obstacles. She was from a very rural part of Mississippi. She wasn't formally educated. She, even by others in the civil rights movement, she was made fun of because her vernacular was not very sophisticated. The words she used were words that were more a part of, a rural background and community. And yet, she knew that justice was her light. And she knew that God was calling her to speak out for the marginalized who were being shown injustice and to be a part of the fight for that justice, particularly in the women's movement and in the voting rights movement. So we're going to hear a recording of Fannie's later on, but she made famous an old spiritual called "This Little Light of Mine." This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. 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 And I feel like that the verses out of Matthew that we just heard, verses out of chapter 28, 16 through 20, are all about that. Letting the light that we have inside of us shine. And each of us have something very unique that I believe God has given us to shine. And that individual gift that shines through us is something that brings us a lot of pleasure, a lot of fulfillment, a lot of connection with God and with other people. But then when you get a group of people who are shining together, then you get community. You get a place, Donna, like Community UCC. I mean, you felt that. What a beautiful testimony. I mean, as a hospice chaplain, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry for your loss. So all of us have something that shines inside of us. However, as a pastor for 20 plus years in churches that were more conservative in their bent, and that's a long story. I grew up in church. I'm a church kid. I grew up in Little Rock, Arkansas. And the church that I grew up in, I was just at last week. My folks are still, they're both deacons. My mom and my dad are both deacons. And that church has always been a progressive church. And now it is a church that has an incredibly similar heart to CUCC. I'm friends with the pastor there as well. And he and I talk every once in a while. But just in watching the things that we believe in here and the things that we are so committed to here, they are so committed to as well. So it's really cool both to be able to talk about those things with my folks because so many people that came out of one church came out of a church that believed something different than what they're in now. And so it's great to be able to talk to my parents about what's going on. And, my mom's all excited. She's probably watching on YouTube. Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. I hope the YouTube's working this week. If it's not, I'm going to be in trouble. So that's the paradigm that I came out of. However, when I got called into ministry, when I discovered that the light inside of me, or at least one of them, was that I wanted to be a part of this thing in the Bible, this message of Jesus Christ being known and talked about and hopefully grown and spread. The channels by which I knew of to do that were more conservative in nature. So I went to a more conservative seminary, and I worked for 20 years in more conservative churches. But I still thought things like social justice, anti-racism, sexism, all those things would be something that you could bring up in the church, and it would be something that the church would embrace because those things are rooted in love. But that wasn't always the case, to say the least. These verses out of Matthew are the fuel to so many conservative churches and their spreading of the gospel, if you will, their version of the gospel. And so what actually happens, though, because so many churches are spreading a gospel that is rooted in narcissism, rooted in shame, rooted in fear, is this idea of the Great Commission that we just heard about, which is this beautiful statement that Jesus says, look, I'm giving this to you. This is now yours, yours to create, yours to embrace, yours to share. Instead of it being something like that, so many times it has become something that has been based in control, based in a greed, based in a desire for people to create a top-down leadership standard, and really something that has become harmful, something that has caused trauma. And like John 10:10 says, Jesus came that we could have life to the full, but what this type of spreading of the gospel really does is it creates an empty life. It creates a life of people wondering, am I doing this right? And I began to see that over and over and more and more. And then ultimately, I was at 4 churches over the courses of 20 years. At each church, the rubber would meet the road, and myself and the church would say, you know what, we're at an impasse here. We can't do this anymore. And my last church that I was at in Tucson, I was at for 20 years, 12 of those 20 years. Thought we were making some headway, thought we were seeing some good things happen, but ultimately it came to that place of coming to a head, and in talking with Kat about it, we both realized we got to figure something else out because this is not working. And so we left the church. Ultimately, Dr. Christina Cleveland, who is a professor, she's a theologian, she's a professor of divinity at Duke Divinity, was a professor of theology at Duke Divinity School. She's written a book called God as a Black Woman, and highly recommend going and checking that out. But she says in that book that the kind of structure that I came out of, she calls that white male God. And that's, in my experience, exactly what it was. And white male God, its values are tradition, logic, reason, certainty, and consensus. And that's exactly what that version of this Great Commission is trying to promote. And that's exactly I think that's exactly why so many people feel like, well, I'm told that I have a light inside of me, but I don't feel like I have a light inside of me because I never can measure up. And that's because they're trying to measure up to tradition, logic, reason, certainty, and consensus. But the fruits of the Spirit, as the book of Galatians talk about, are love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and gentleness and faithfulness and self-control. That's what happens when God enters into our life. And those are the complete opposite of tradition, logic, reason, certainty, and consensus. Complete opposite of white male God. She calls it the black feminine. She herself is an African American, and like I said, it's a beautiful book. I'm about halfway through it, but check it out for sure. And to be sure, myself, I am evolving. Like I said, I was in mostly conservative churches for 20 years, so I'm deconstructing, devolving, and reconstructing and evolving. And so much of that has been what CUCC has fed and embraced in us as a family. So I really want to make sure that I'm not coming up here and you're thinking that I really know a whole lot about what I'm talking about. I'm learning. I'm a student, as all of us are. And so I don't ever want to come up here and act like that I'm some expert that you should adhere to. Please use your critical thinking skills in everything that I'm talking about today. But with that said, so many of us have grown up with shame, with trauma, with fear, and feeling like this light inside of us that God says we have isn't worth showing. We try to hide it. We try to put our lamp, as Jesus said, under a bucket because we don't want to be judged. We don't want to deal with the backlash of what might happen. But this passage in Matthew, go into all the world. Jesus said, God's given me this beautiful gift, and I've showed you, my followers, the last 3 years when his public ministry took place. I've showed you how to live in a way that is anti-empire. And we use that word anti-empire a lot. And our preaching series for this year comes from the book We Make Our Way by Walking by Brian McLaren. And he does an amazing job, Brian does, of setting up the ministry of Jesus within the context of the Roman Empire. And the ministry of Jesus and its values juxtaposed against the values of the Roman Empire. And for sure, though Jesus never really spoke out, he wasn't like a protester. He wasn't out, with the picket signs and that sort of thing, saying down with Caesar or anything like that. His life was an absolute outspoken example of anti-empire living, of what it truly meant to be compassionate and to value compassionate, of what it truly meant to value the marginalized and those who were overlooked or oppressed. James Baldwin, another civil rights activist, beautiful speaker, eloquent in how he says what he says. Again, if you haven't ever heard James Baldwin, go look him up. But he says the world that I hope to live in isn't going to happen unless I create it. And I feel like that's exactly what Jesus is saying to the disciples. Go create the world based on the light that you have inside of you, that you hope to live in. I've shown you how to do that, but go create it and watch it happen. And in the book that we've been reading, Brian McLaren points out how the Apostle Paul experienced this 20 years after the ministry of Jesus Christ. Paul, it talks about in the book of Acts, released a young teenage girl from slavery. He emancipated her. She was being used. She had a spiritual gift of fortune telling, and she was being used by her owners to make money. She was being absolutely taken advantage of, and slavery was a part of life in empire. And in any empire, whether it's actual slavery, whether it's economic slavery, emotional slavery, slavery is always a part of empire. And there are always those who are enslaved and those who are enslaving. And of course, when Paul emancipated this girl, her owners were in no way happy with it. They stripped him, they beat him, they threw him in jail. And empire does not like emancipation. Empire does not like critical thinking. And those are exactly the things that Jesus came to do. He said, I came to set the captives free. So my prayer for us is that each of us can start to experience what we just prayed, that the kingdom of God would come to this place right here, right now. Give us this day our daily bread. Yes, give us what we need to eat, but yes, give us what we need to survive, to shine, to thrive. This idea of the commission that Jesus gave his disciples is directly tied to another passage where Jesus is talking to a person, a religious person. And if you didn't know, religion and empire also often go together. I experienced that for 20 years. And there's a religious leader who is very much tied into the values of empire. And in the book of Mark, we see this narrative, and he comes up to Jesus and he says, okay, Jesus, I want to know the one thing. I'm assuming this guy was an A+ student, and he just wanted to get to the point and wanted to know what it is that he had to do, to get in good with God, and kind of self-motivated in the question that he was asking Jesus. He said, what's the greatest thing that I can do? What's the one thing? Just cut through the crap and just tell me what to do. And Jesus says, all right, I'll play that game. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind. Oh, and love your neighbor as you love yourself. Sounds easy. Easy for somebody who's looking for just one or two sentences to put up on a plaque in their office or something like that. But for sure, three of the most difficult things that we can do, especially if you're trying to do them from the values of tradition and consensus and the other values that empire and white male God have at the root of what that pursuit of God is all about. Because loving God with all your heart, soul, mind, strength is something that, first of all, many of us have this idea of God up on a mountain, and he's got his lightning bolt in hand, ready to smite us if we screw up. I didn't even grow up in a church that valued that, and I still thought that about God, because sometimes I watch Christian TV, and that's what you got, was this, hellfire and brimstone kind of God. And I was like, well, I even went to a youth camp when I was, and I went to youth camp every summer, and, it was great. Sometimes I was there for, learning things about God. Sometimes I was there to find a girl, whatever. But I went to youth camp, and we went to this one camp in Kansas City, and it was they set a deal up where they had about 2,000 teenagers that were there, and it was on a college campus, and they had the auditorium set up, and the stage was heaven. I'm sorry, the balcony was heaven, the stage was hell, and the kids sitting in the seats, they were the earth. And they had people on camp staff coming around telling each of us the good news of Jesus Christ so that we wouldn't die and go to hell. If at the end of the time we hadn't heard this message, if we hadn't had a staff member come up to us and tell us one-on-one about this message, we had to walk on stage because we were in hell. If we got the blessing of being told, we got to walk up to the balcony. And at the end of the time, me and my friends hadn't been witnessed to or whatever, but we were like, well, we're not going to hell. We're going to heaven by ourselves anyway, because screw this. So I hope I can say that in church. It's been a while, but anyway. But that's the idea of this Great Commission that churches have. And that's the idea that Empire has about how things ought to operate. But this idea of loving God with all your heart, soul, strength, and your mind is not about performance. Because God is love. And God loves wherever God is, which God is everywhere all the time. Love is there. So I think this idea of loving God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength is to actually just let God into your life, the events of your life, brushing your teeth, taking a shower, eating breakfast, driving to work, going to the grocery store. Thich Nhat Hanh, one of my favorite spiritual leaders that I discovered after I left the church and when I got into the residency that I went through for chaplaincy, which was an incredibly beautiful experience. And chaplaincy is much more about spirituality, not about religion. And so we got exposed to all these different spiritual pursuits from all over the world. And Thich Nhat Hanh is someone, again, look him up. He just recently passed a few months ago from Vietnam, just a giant in the Buddhist community. And we're going to talk about breathing here in just a minute, but I was so amazed by him because he helped me understand the Bible more than almost any pastor that I was ever around, specifically the idea of being still. And I think that's the best way that we can love God, is just to be still. Be still and open our fears up to God. Be still and open our pain up to God. Be still and open our schedule up to God. Because God is there. I mean, I love that CUCC always says God is still speaking, because God is still speaking. And as soon as we are still enough to listen, God is speaking to us and fills us with his love for us. Then we can love God back. And I think that's the process that these verses in Mark are talking about when Jesus was telling this guy, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, mind. But then he said, love your neighbor as yourself. And that's really the mind job right there. Because if you know anything about psychology and about how brain chemistry works, you know that you cannot love someone else. Well, let me put it this way. The degree to which you can love someone else depends on the degree to which you can love yourself. And so he ties these two things together. And first of all, conservative church says, if you love yourself, you're an idolater. You should hate yourself and only love God. And that's just not accurate. I mean, it's right there in the Bible, and we see it right there. And yet, for some reason, they've adopted this value of that. And I grew up with that. Again, even though I didn't grow up with that coming from my church, the other communities that I was moving around in, and especially when I got out into my own ministry, self-hate was something that was almost celebrated. But Jesus is saying, don't do that. Don't do that at all. And certainly self-hate is something that Empire wants, because Empire wants consistency. And if we hate ourselves, and Empire says that Empire is the greatest thing that you can be a part of, well, then you'll kind of think, okay, I'm no good, but Empire must be great, so I'll just go and follow Empire. But Jesus is saying, no, love yourself. Love that light inside of you. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. Learn how to let that shine. Then you can love your neighbor, because you understand your neighbor is struggling with exactly the same thing that you're struggling with. And that creates empathy, and that creates compassion, and that creates connection, and that creates community. And then we're getting into what Jesus is talking about when he's telling his disciples in Matthew 28, verses 16 through 20, to go and be a part of teaching the world that in all that Jesus has shown them and taught them over the previous 3 years. I don't want to in any way minimize anybody's pain. We are, as a church, becoming a wise congregation. We're learning about the effects of trauma. Previous to leaving the church, one of the things that spurred the exit that my wife and I made from the church was trauma, was learning about our own trauma story, learning some things about ourselves. Mine starts with the fact that I was adopted. And again, my parents are watching, and I love them dearly, and we have talked about this. It's not anything that they did necessarily. There is a biological reality of kids that are adopted that occurs in the womb with the chemical exchange, and we are predisposed, we being adoptees and or orphans, are predisposed to fearing rejection at levels that are much more than those that aren't adopted. We are predisposed to needing a place to belong much more than those who weren't adopted. That's where my story starts. My wife has the origins of her story, but all of us, this world causes trauma. Just read the news. Look at the internet. There is trauma all over the world. So I don't in any way want to minimize anyone's trauma that's in here. It is not easy to love yourself. My wife and I are looking for a therapist. We had one in Tucson. We're looking for one now. We're looking for an AA group because alcoholism is a part of our family history. All of those things, community, are so necessary in order to find healing and to move forward. I mean, again, Donna, thank you for sharing that, because you experienced that. So hope is possible, but it's not easy, and it's certainly not something that you can just say, okay, I'm going to be healed today. But there is healing that can happen. And that's what loving yourself is all about. And I just do want to offer one thing. If you've never, again, back to the teachings of Thich Nhat Hanh, if you've never sat and meditated and just breathing in and breathing out, I highly, highly recommend it. Because God is right here and right now, and where God is, there is love. And God is ecstatic about sharing his love with us. And I just attributed a pronoun to God, a male pronoun to God. And I want to say, forgive me for that, because I do not really think God is binary, but again, I'm evolving, and so please bear with me as I evolve out of those pronouns. But there's something very, and I didn't believe it, but part of my project in my chaplain residency was to incorporate some of the practices into the spiritual pursuits that we were studying, and so I incorporated meditation into mine, and it's crazy. You may only tap into stillness and being present for a few seconds. If you sit there for 5 minutes, you may only tap into it for a few seconds, but oh my gosh, those are the most sacred few seconds of your day. And then the more you practice it, the longer that sacred time happens. And so that's a great place to start to love yourself. And then that gives you something you can share with someone else. Hey, I had 3 seconds of sacredness today. You want to sit with me and try it? And all you just do is breathe. So as I wrap it up, I want to give you, I want to give you 3 examples of what moving out into this Great Commission, these words that Jesus talked about to his disciples. I want to give you 3 examples that I've experienced recently since we've been here in Fresno of what I think that looks like. Because yes, I think it has to do with big picture stuff. There's times where opportunities come up and we get to do things that a lot of people are a part of, but mostly it's the daily connections that happen. First thing that happened that I want to share with you, one of the things that I saw that blew me away like very few things ever have in church was a few weeks ago when Aravist Rocha stood up here and shared with us about her struggle with depression. I don't know if you guys felt or understood the sacredness of that moment and the holiness of that ground we were on, but that was absolutely amazing for her to be able to come up here and say those words to us and trust us. She was at that point where those disciples were of like, man, we don't know if we want to worship Jesus or not. There's a risk here. And man, she took a risk. And then she made it safe for all of us who have struggled with anything in the area of depression. Most beautiful thing that I've seen in a long time in church. That's what the Great Commission is all about. And if we learn how to do that in our relationships with other people, the world is going to change. One person at a time, the world is going to change. Second thing that I think the Great Commission has at its root is grace, and a lot of grace. A lot of, I'll put it this way. Brene Brown, we've talked about her before. She says, if you can reconcile your disagreements and your conflicts, the trust that you have in each other is going to grow. Quick snapshot of reconciliation. 3-4 weeks ago, my family and I purchased our very first brand new car. And it's a Corolla. It gets really good gas mileage. Turns out it's cheaper to buy a new car and have a car payment with great gas mileage than it is to own a 20-year-old car that gets 10 miles to the gallon. We did the math and we realized we're going to save about $300 if we get rid of the big thing and get a new thing. And so that's what we did. And it was cool because I've literally never had a brand new car before. They shipped it over from Japan. So we were the first, my butt was the first butt in the seat, so to speak. Never had that awesome experience before. We got it home to our house at 9 o'clock at night on a Friday night. The next morning at 9 in the morning, in taking the dogs to get some shots that they needed, we have 2, they were in the back seat. I was at a stoplight that's right out from our neighborhood, and I was trying to get the window down because they were in the back seat, and I couldn't find the right button to get their window down. And all of a sudden, I felt, and I was like, oh my gosh, I just rear-ended something. And I turned around, and it was a Tesla. And I mean, I'm screwed. Really? I'm going to, either my insurance is going to go way up, or I'm going to end up paying thousands of dollars that I don't have. So we pull over and I am shaken. And the woman that was the driver got out of the car. She was very sweet. She looked at it. There was a little ding, and she said, eh. She said, let me call my husband. It's his car. She did, and he was like, eh. She's like, go have a good day. Don't worry about it. And I was like, oh, my gosh. Thank you for sharing the Great Commission with me, lady. So the last example that I want to share as we close is the sharing of their life that our new friends and new family, Archie and Dave, have given to myself and my family. And before I go on, Archie and Dave just celebrated their 6-year wedding anniversary, so yay for them. Met both of them back in the fall. We were at at one of the new member celebrations, and we were all getting coffee. And Anna and Kat, my wife, my daughter and my wife, were then and are now at a volleyball tournament. Anna is very, very deeply committed volleyball player, and she's at a tournament right now, and I'm heading over there after we're done. But Archie and Dave, so I was here by myself that day, and we just sat down and had coffee. And basically, I found out they were almost as new to Fresno as we were. And Archie said, well, would you like to come over for dinner? We'd love to have you guys over. I was like, yeah. Turns out Archie, being Filipino, made this feast like nothing I've ever seen except maybe a few Thanksgivings. And just amazing food. And then we literally took 2 weeks' worth of leftovers back to our house because that's what Archie does. So if Archie ever asks you to go to dinner, first, you're gonna eat a lot, and next, you're not gonna have to go to the grocery store that week either. So we went over there, and then they came over to our house a couple of weeks later, and then not too far into our connection with them, Archie said, listen, we moved here from Florida, and in Florida, all my family is there. So I don't have any family over in Fresno, and we don't have any family here either. He said, so we used to get together every Sunday night and eat and just really have connection time. But we can't do that now, so now you guys are our family. So every Sunday night, I'm going to cook dinner, and if you guys want to come over, you can. And he's dead serious about that. He, every week, asks us, you coming over? Sometimes we can, sometimes we can't. We're going next week. He's making some pho. If you've never had pho, check it out. But the point is that Dave and Archie are sharing their life. Also, if you want to know all the ins and outs of Costco where Dave works, oh my gosh. He will tell you what's up and what deals are happening. And we are literally, Costco, we joined Costco because of Dave. That's what the Great Commission is all about. It is sharing our lives together in very simple ways. And folks, I can tell you, have not been in Fresno. It'll be a year next week. But this city is hurting, and this city needs the love that CUCC has, that Donna experienced, that we experienced, that so many of you have experienced. But Jesus is telling us it's not just about believing the right thing. It's about going out. And so my prayer is that we can find some time to light our own light inside of us so that we will then feel the blessing that God has given us to go out and connect with people, because, oh my gosh, do people need CUCC. In closing, I'd like for you to listen to a song. It is the version of this little light of mine that Fannie Lou Hamer made famous. I'd like for you to listen to it, close your eyes, breathe. We won't listen to all of it, but I'd like for you to listen to it and close your eyes and breathe and just say to God, okay, I'm ready. Light me up.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Oh, everywhere I go, Lord, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, everywhere
Thank you, Derek. Yeah.
Draw the circle, draw the circle wide. Draw the circle, draw the circle wide. No one stands alone, we'll stand side by side. Draw the circle, draw the circle wide. Draw the circle, draw the circle wide. Draw the circle, draw the circle wide. No one stands alone, we'll stand side by side. Draw the circle, draw the circle wide. Draw the circle wide, draw it wider still. Let it be our song. No one stands alone, standing side by side. Draw the circle, draw the circle wide. The circle, draw the circle wide. Draw the circle, draw the circle wide. No one stands alone, we'll stand side by side. Draw the circle, draw the circle wide.
Please rise in body and spirit.
Shine on, God, shine on. Teach us love, we pray. Lend us out to spread your love and grace. Maybe there'll be peace someday.
Thank you. James Baldwin.